you're in a good place now. You are listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, we're going to be talking about post-toxic relationships, the thoughts that go through your mind after a toxic relationship breakup. Many of us have thoughts that run rampant through our brains after a breakup of that magnitude, and we worry, we wonder, we question ourselves, we ask ourselves big questions. Did I do something wrong? Could I have done something different? Was it me? Sometimes we turn it around and we say, well, we're never going to find another relationship. It's never going to work out. I'm just destined to constantly have these types of relationships. It's interesting how the brain begins to play tricks on us. I'm never going to meet anybody. I'm going to live the rest of my life on my own. Never going to find a relationship. I'm going to be single and lonely for the rest of my life. And I find that more often than not, these thoughts scare us, right? They scare us. They make us wonder, well, maybe I should just stay. Maybe I should go back. Maybe if I went back, it'll get better. And at least if I get back, I'll be in a relationship, right? And our mind plays tricks on us. It's what I call programming. The programming to keep us in the negative, toxic environment and to keep going back because to some degree, at our core, we believe that we don't deserve anything better or we're never going to get anything better. So how do we switch this up? How do we begin to understand what's true and what's falsehood? What's true and what's a negative fantasy land? And I realized that it can be really hard to interpret. It can be really hard to understand what is what because we believe these things for so long. A lot of times being alone is one of our biggest fears. Being rejected or abandoned goes to one of our biggest fears. It's one of our core wounds. And those fears become bigger than life, right? And it's interesting because a lot of times the actual things that we fear, the absolute worst fears in our life, become reality. And I find it interesting because what we really do think about, even if it's subconscious, we bring into our reality. And we can bring it in the form of someone else as well. Because if we have a fear, let's say, of rejection, more often than not, we might bring someone to us in our life that also has a fear of rejection. Perhaps we have a fear of abandonment. And we have a fear that someone will abandon us, leave us, okay? It goes back to our core wounds, goes back to our childhood. Perhaps one of our parents left when we were really young and never came back. And there's that fear that everybody's always going to leave us. And I find that many times when we have that fear of abandonment, it's interesting how we can find another person and get into a relationship with someone who also has a fear of abandonment. The interesting part about this, though, is that oftentimes the way that I show or the way that I deal with my fear of abandonment is the exact opposite of the way that you deal with your fear of abandonment. I find that many of us coming from maybe a codependent standpoint, more codependent in nature, right? I don't like to define any of us, but more codependent signs. We come from a position of, well, we'll just stick in it. We'll make it work. What can we do to make it work? What can I do? Is there something that I haven't done? How can I change myself? How can I be? What can I say? What can I accept? I don't want to rock the boat too much. I'm walking on eggshells, but I'm doing the best I can. Maybe I don't want to put boundaries out because I'm scared of what will happen if I put boundaries. Will that person stop loving me? Will they stop being there? On the flip side, when we're dealing with someone that's not dealing from a codependent aspect, their fear of abandonment might show in the fact that they're going to leave us before we leave them. They could start finding faults within us to push away us, to push them away from us emotionally. As long as they find faults within us, they can create that reality that we're not good enough, there's something wrong with us, and eventually distance them away far enough that they can leave and not be abandoned by us. I find, though, through these toxic relationships, and when I say toxic relationship, I know that this is used very often, okay? And I find that a lot of times we don't realize that, hey, it does take two to tango. And we have to work on ourselves before we can actually get out of this programming rut of finding relationships that don't work. And what I mean by don't work is that we can't find common ground. We can't communicate. We have a challenge of communication, and one person's emotions aren't allowed. I find oftentimes when I'm working with clients that many people aren't able to express how they feel. And when they try to express how they feel, the other person shuts them down, gets angry, slams the door, yells at them, or, generally makes fun of them or discredits their feelings. This all goes back to a toxic environment. An environment where we can't be ourselves, where we can't speak our truth. Communication is key, but if we don't know how to even get to the communication standpoint and don't know actually how to communicate, how can we discuss about how to better communicate? I found that the less ability that we have to be honest with ourselves, the less we have to be able to communicate and be honest with others. It's just part of it. We can't give someone what we don't have. We can't love them in a way if we don't love ourselves in that way. We can't respect somebody in a way that if we don't respect ourselves. It all goes back to how we treat ourselves, how we respect ourselves, how we deal with ourselves, and the list goes on. I find, though, that the brain is funny because it'll create these realities, right? It'll create these realities, and many of you understand what I'm talking about, where you've been in a relationship and it gets bad and it gets even worse, and then you take a break and, a couple of weeks go by and you go, okay, you know what? There were some great qualities. I'm going to get back in this. You get back into it. You go back through the same BS. Things haven't gotten any better. It's actually gotten worse. Take another break. But then your brain's playing tricks on you. You're never going to find anybody. You're going to be alone the rest of your life. This might be the best option you have. And you're totally screwing it up. And I find that it's like we have to be getting real with ourselves. We have to begin to say, okay, I'm hearing my mind chatter. It's almost like you have that friend, right, that just doesn't shut up. And the mind is chattering and chattering and chattering away, creating all these realities. And a lot of these realities are just not good realities. They're definitely not positive realities. They're not healthy realities. And these realities are banked on what I consider the negative broken record. Okay? And the negative broken record is interesting because the negative broken record is the negative thoughts about ourselves in our head, or the negative thoughts about our life in our head, and how they're extremely black and white, right? There's never any middle ground. There's never any gray area. They're extremely black and white. And I'll give you some examples. I'm going to be alone forever. Okay, I'm never going to find anybody that understands me. And that's always an interesting one, too, because it's like we're creating our own reality in this negative vacuum and then seeing the world from that position. And I'm not talking about let's change this all with affirmations and let's add platitudes. No, that doesn't work. It just doesn't work. But we have to realize, what is it that we're telling ourselves? Okay? What is it that we're telling ourselves on a daily basis that is creating our reality? And we have to get down to the brass tacks of this. We got to start listening to the chatter. Many of you can sit there and listen to a friend chatter for hours. You can go to the restaurant. You can go to the bar. You can, maybe your workout buddies. And you can listen to your friend just talk and talk away and talk away. And you listen. You actually pay attention. We do for our friends. It's amazing the attention that we'll pay to our friends that we won't pay to ourselves. And I find it interesting because we normally don't listen to our own chatter. What do? We turn on the TV as loud as possible. Maybe we turn on the radio. Maybe we have the radio and the TV on. Maybe we play video games, right? Maybe we get on the phone constantly. We're on the phone. We have the radio on. Maybe the TV's on in the other room. Constantly going so that we can drown out all of what's happening in our mental mindset. And it's interesting because when it's all quiet, there's no TV on, there's no radio on, there's nobody on the phone, you're not out and about at the club or at the restaurant or at the bar, all of a sudden you begin to hear that, the chatter. But usually what happens is we've just gotten out of some relationship, or we're in a relationship where there's some sort of toxicity. And what happens is we start thinking about the relationship issues, the problems in the relationship. Maybe we fixate on the problems with the other person. Well, they have this problem and that problem, and they do this to me and they do that to me, and I don't really like that, and it hurts my feelings. Or maybe we fixate on the fact that we have just gotten out of this relationship and we're wondering, what are they doing? Are they seeing someone else? Are they sleeping with someone else? Who are they doing? Who are they doing? What are they doing? And you begin to fixate on that. And all the while we fixate on that other person, we lose sight of our reality. We lose sight of our life. We lose sight of what matters. And many of us have never heard the inner chatter at all. We've never taken time to actually listen to the chatter in our own mind. And it's very eye-opening. It's very eye-opening because it begins to put perspective into why we do what we do, the relationships that we've had, the problems we've had in our life, the self-sabotaging behavior, the toxic relationships, and everything in between. But it takes time, it takes awareness, and it takes being mindful. And I realize that some of the best things can happen right after a breakup. And I know that you say, wow, Ashley, you're saying that there's an opportunity here after a breakup. Yes, there's always an opportunity. And it's interesting how we don't see opportunity in the word no. It's interesting how we don't see an opportunity in a breakup. Sometimes this can be the safest thing, the best thing that ever happened to us in our lives. And I've realized that at the time of a breakup, after we are working through it and we've had time away from this person and there's not communication, we get to a point where we can actually start looking at ourselves. And that's where we can begin to break some of this programming. That's when we can begin to understand the mental chatter. That's when we can begin to realize that a lot of these thoughts that we've had in our head are just self-sabotaging thoughts that get in the way of our own personal growth. Actually getting in the way of us making actual major changes and creating the reality that we want. And that's what I find so powerful is that in the problem, in the issue, in this pain position, once we can actually realize that we don't want to keep deflecting to the other person, thinking, oh, I wonder what they're doing. I wonder if they're happy. I wonder if they're out with someone else. We begin to pull that energy back slowly, reminding ourselves that we are of value. Remember, if we're always thinking about someone else, that's reminding ourselves that we're not as valuable as that person. So it's very important for us to connect with that. And so in today's show, we're going to be talking about the mind. We're going to be talking about the mental programming. We're going to be talking about the chatter. We're going to talk about the extremes, the black and white thinking, because this is very important. And we're going to really shine some light on this so you can really not only feel better, get some clarity and understanding, but to begin to make changes in your life that could completely change exactly what we're going through. Some powerful changes to begin to understand not only the programming, the situation, but to find the life that you've been looking for, more of it in a more positive way. The more we understand about our mindset, the more we understand where our thoughts are, the more we understand why we do what we do, and the more clarity and understanding we have of ourselves. We're no longer in the dark of why we do something. We actually have illumination to why we did it. And so we're going to be really focusing on that, being able to really explore those extremes, those extreme black and white thinking, understand that, be able to process that, and see it as it is. This is going to be a very powerful show. I'm glad that you tuned in today. So stay tuned. Live your true life perspectives. With me, your host, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. Well, I'll be back this time. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
Turn it up and jump in the deep end on perspectives. Now, here's Ashley.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, we're talking about, our mental mindset, especially after a breakup, and especially after a breakup from a toxic relationship. I mean, why else are we breaking up? But, if a relationship's not working, there's got to be some sort of toxicity, or the fact is that we've decided that this is no longer serving its purpose and we move on. But I've realized that when we understand this better, we're able to understand, first up, where our mind is at, because I found that when we're in a relationship, we have a tendency of focusing on the problems in the relationship, right? That's just normal, the way that we do things, right? The human condition. We look at the problems in the relationship, the communication problems, the breakdowns, those sort of things. And rarely do we really focus on the things that we actually need to focus on, the growth that we need, to be able to understand the self-sabotage in that type of behavior that we have, because a lot of times we don't see that. And then sometimes we actually exercise in self-sabotaging behavior because of other issues that are coming from the relationship, but those relationship issues are usually at the core of things that we're dealing with internally, right? And I've realized that once we've gone through a breakup or we're in that type of position, it's time to really focus on, okay, where is my mental mindset? And I found that many of us have thoughts that are extremely black and white. These thoughts color our life and they shape our life in a way that's not healthy. And a lot of times we don't even realize that we're thinking this way. It's been around so long, we've had these thoughts for so long that we don't even realize how much these impact everything that we do, everything that we say, in every relationship that we have. And it's not until we begin to actually listen to our thoughts. It's not until we begin to actually open up our mind and go, okay, wait a second. I'm catching the fact that I have this dialogue going on, and some of this dialogue is not that positive. Some of this dialogue is not going to help me in my life, and some of this dialogue is holding me back. But in order to get there, we have to let go of the problems in the relationship. We have to let go of focusing on the other person. Now, we can look at the other person and what they've done based on triggering, and that can help us to understand how we've been triggered, right? We can look back at the past and say, okay, that triggered me in that situation. Now, why was I triggered? Because most of the time our triggers are based on our personal thoughts, right? Our triggers are created by our personal thoughts. Our triggers. So like when somebody triggers you, they can only trigger you if you subconsciously feel some way about you in the way that they're triggering you, if that makes sense. Because if somebody says something to you that's completely absurd that you don't buy into, or they say something about you, you're not going to question your reality. It's not going to even, it's going to be more of, wow, where's this coming from? It's going to be more of a question for that instead of an anger or resentment piece or a pain piece. And so in those situations, we can definitely look at the other person, look at some of the past triggers, understand how that triggered us and how that impacted us. But I've realized that a lot of times we spend a lot of time looking at that situation. It's good to understand it. It's good to understand the toxicity. It's good to understand what went wrong in the relationship. It's good to really see that part, examine it, and understand what brought us there. But then there comes a time when we have to exit out that area and realize, okay, there's a reason why I was brought into this relationship. What are some of the core reasons? What are some of the reasons why I would have accepted this in my life? Okay, because we only accept things that we're used to. We only accept things that we're used to, or we only accept things that we think that we are supposed to have. Right? I mean, seriously, if you order a sandwich and at a restaurant and they come back with a third of it and everybody else is saying, you're not going to accept that. You're going to be like, okay, yeah, hey, I think the rest of my sandwich is somewhere in the kitchen. But it's interesting how we accept certain flaws and situations within our relationships based on what we're either used to, what has been normalized in our life, or what we think that we're worthy of. So stay tuned. I'm going to be talking more about this. When I return, I'm talking more about the mental mindset, the extremes in thoughts, how we can get lost in our own thoughts, that black and white thinking that keeps us in toxic relationships, and more. So stay tuned, because Live Your True Life Perspectives with me, your host, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
This is Jake Busey, and you're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, we're talking about dealing with life post a toxic relationship or post a breakup and how it impacts us so. Many of us have the mental chatter that we're not really aware of. We don't really know what it's saying, and it can lull us in to believing certain things about possible future outcomes. Things about ourselves, things about what we're worthy of, things about possible being alone, being away from people, those types of things. And most of these thoughts are very black and white in nature, very extreme. And as you know, anytime that you ever say always or never, it's not that good of a thing. We don't want to generalize. And that's usually what we're doing in this black and white thinking, is that we're creating these realities where these case scenarios is an always situation or a never. And that's one of the things that I want you to connect with. First, we have to be aware of the mental chatter. So, right, awareness is key. And the only way that you can do that is to quiet the outside noise. Okay? Whether that's how many people you're hanging out with, whether that's the radio, not this particular show. After this show, you can turn it off. No, I'm serious. No, I definitely want you. I'd love to keep you on. Well, listening to the show, because I think that this show will really help to expound on what we're needing to change and work on, so that we can really listen to ourselves. And a lot of times we don't listen. A lot of times we listen to our friends, we listen to others tell us, we watch the news, we listen to TV, but we don't listen to our own chatter. We don't see that there's any significance. And that's really sad, because there is so much significance, there is so much value, and actually taking a moment to begin to listen to that chatter. And when I started working on this, when I embarked on this process that I came up with a long time ago, I realized that I had some thoughts in my head that weren't very positive. And I didn't really know they existed. I had no idea. I had no idea that I thought certain ways about myself, that I thought certain ways about certain things, that I saw certain things as not being opportunities, that I saw certain things being painful. And it was based on very always and never thinking. And it was interesting, because when I look back, I remember this one particular breakup, and I had enough. I moved out, and it was a very challenging relationship. Toxic, if you want to define it as toxic, challenging, anything you can think of. And I remember it took me a while to deal with that, but I remember at one point, I was seeing all the problems with this person, and then one day I realized, well, I was drawn to this person because of something within inside myself. I was drawn to this person because either we're very similar, or I feel like this is what I can get, this is the best I can do, and I feel like I need this in my life. Like this was either normalized in my life, or it was based on my own lower self-esteem, self-worth, self-value. Somehow that was created in my core beliefs that stood with me for a long period of time. And I had to figure out what those were. We have to be able to get to those, to understand, to see them. And that can be challenging. It can be very challenging, because it can be hard to hear. If we're not listening, it can be very challenging to hear. And so what I realized is that I had to turn off the noise, like the radio, the TV, all that stuff. I had to get off the phone, because if I wasn't working, I was on the phone 24/7 to busy myself, right? To keep myself busy, to keep myself on that, listening to other people's issues, trying to solve their issues instead of listening to my own stuff and actually working on myself. It's a lot easier sometimes, right, for us to solve and help other people look at their issues, because we're not in the middle of it. Right? That's why it's so great when you're working with somebody, and it's important when you're working with people, when you're dealing with these types of stresses, anxiety, and life changes, is someone that's not connected with you, someone that gains nothing from one way or another, how you choose and where you go, because you need to have someone that literally is completely neutral, that can help you and understands the process, but also at the same time gains nothing from your choices. And a lot of times when you talk to friends and family about your situation, that's kind of where we begin the problem, right? Is because family and friends, even though they want to help, usually have something that they would prefer you to do, or somehow or not they win, or somehow or not they visualize themselves losing, or something happens if you don't choose that direction. And oftentimes what happens with that is that you end up getting advice, but the advice is kind of slanted, because it's not based on the advice that's neutral. It's and it could also be a neutral advice as far as it doesn't matter if you stay with that person or not. It's not going to change their life, but at the same point in time, it's based on their background. It's based on their past. It's based on how they were raised. It's based on their beliefs, what information they give you instead of that neutrality. And sometimes the beliefs can be quite limiting. And I found that, as we're raised, any of the limiting beliefs that our family holds on to, oftentimes we as well hold on to those because they're taught to us, right? They're taught to us. They're taught to us to believe. They're taught to us, and we believe them, and we hold on to them, and we believe them, and we make them into reality, right? And many of us have our own limiting beliefs, right? We have our limiting beliefs about who we are. Or, we limit our beliefs about the value we present on this planet. Or, we look at ourselves based on one thing or another, and we don't see ourselves as a being, as a person of a being of light that's being here and has value within that own reality. And we're not really taught that either because our parents weren't taught that. It's not something that our parents were taught. It's not something that we were given privy to. It wasn't something that your parents were like, hey, you have value on this earth just being here. You are valuable just in the process of you being there in life. And nobody really shares that because guess what? Nobody shared it with them. Most of us were raised to believe that it depends on how much money you make or how many, educational degrees you have or how many children you have or the size of the house that you have. It's not based on the authentic reality of it's not what you've done. It's you in the process of just being. It's not doing, it's being. But we're not really taught that. Most of us were never raised around that reality. And so we have to begin to realize, okay, we all have limiting beliefs. We all have some sort of something that gets in the way of seeing our value to some degree. Okay. And in that situation, we might not make the best of decisions based on that because how can we? If we have, self-limiting beliefs, how can we make always the right decision? Because we're going to limit ourselves to some degree in these beliefs because that's what we believe that we're going to have. We have to change the belief at its core before we can stop acting on it. And the key here is that some of you may say, hey, I'm trying to work on this, but I don't always hear those thoughts. But you have to basically start getting quiet enough to do so. Because many of us have tried to, I would say, white noise this stuff forever. Okay, I've worked with some clients where they tell me, oh, well, I have to go to bed with the TV on. Why? Well, my thoughts just keep going on and on and on. Okay, well, have you started working on what your thoughts are? Have you started writing them down? Have you started like taking note of what they are? Because obviously these thoughts want to come out at some point, and you're not doing a very good job of getting rid of them. You're just basically trying to silence them. The fact of taking, and I understand having sleep disorder is not a laughing matter. But sometimes we have sleep disorders based on the fact that we have anxiety, we have stress, and a lot of that anxiety and stress goes back to our thoughts that are constantly bombarding us in our head. Stress and anxiety, it's sometimes you can have anxiety just randomly, but most of the time, stress and anxiety comes from a thought. Okay, it comes from an image, it comes from a thought. That thought predicates it, right? It triggers it. And so we normally don't go into the source of what the thought is. We just deal with the symptom of the anxiety or the stress that comes from it, right? So we got to start going to the source and understanding that. And I found that when we don't have other people to look at, so when we've gone through a breakup and we don't have their issues to look at, we need to start beginning to focus on us. What is it within us? What are our pain points? What were the triggers in the previous relationship? Were you constantly triggered to defend yourself? Why is that? Why would you be in a relationship where you're constantly defending yourself if you haven't normalized that, or if you don't think that you can get anything better than that? Think about it. If you were raised in an environment where you were never asked to defend yourself, your truth was never questioned, and the way that you feel was supported, you would not ever, you could get into a relationship for maybe a few moments where you're like focused, like where you're having to defend yourself and, that sort of thing. And you're having to defend your feelings and somebody's mocking you. You might be in that for a few moments, but there would be a point where you're like, this is insanity. Okay. I don't even know what we're doing here. This is so off the Richter scale of my reality. And that's what I really want to point out is that, when we normalize something, when something's been normalized in our life, and it could be just watching mom and dad. You could have been in a household where there was a lot of arguments, a lot of fighting, a lot of drama, a lot of anger, a lot of resentment. And there's a tendency of what? Of us manufacturing that. There's a tendency of manufacturing that. There's a tendency of us finding that, recreating that in our adult life. And we're like, why is this happening? Why are we recreating this? Why is this part of my reality? Well, it's because you've been shown it for so long. It's become part of that reality. And so it's like identifying some of these things, just being able to understand some of these things can go a long way for us understanding why we're in specific relationships that we're in. Why did we choose this? Why are we in this? Why are we feeling this way? Why did we walk into this relationship? And I hear some clients say, hey, if there's a narcissist within a 2-mile radius or a 10-mile radius or an 80-mile radius, I'm going to find them. I'm going to date them. If there's someone that has BPD in a 50-mile radius, yep, that's going to be my next girlfriend or boyfriend. But see, I don't think that's the case. I don't think it's about that type of situation. I don't think that it's that specific to cluster B. I think it's specific to our core wounds and our beliefs and what we're accepting, what we will allow ourselves to accept, but also finding someone that's at the same level as us that hasn't worked on really listening to the mental chatter. Because right when we start doing, we start walking through the mental chatter and we start writing it down and we start paying attention to it, we can begin to understand where our mind share is. We can begin to understand why we make choices. We can begin to understand all these things at a greater level that we've never been able to understand before. And I find it powerful. I find it powerful because we're able to get a grip on where our mind is. And I know that many of you have these black and white thoughts where they're extreme, and I want you to catch those. I want you to write those down. I want you to catch those because those black and white extreme thoughts are not true. There's no truth in them whatsoever. They're completely untrue. Something can never, always, never be, ever be. Nothing can be always and nothing can be never. And so I want you to catch that in your thought process, because the more that you're aware of these types of thoughts, the more you're aware of how the brain and our programming is playing tricks on us. It's trying to get us to force ourselves into a situation or force ourselves back into something we know out of the fear of the unknown. It also creates this sadness, this scarcity, this overwhelming sense of alone, being alone. I'm going to be alone for the rest of my life, that sort of thing. And it creates that reality and it bombards us. And then we begin to fixate on that. And we begin to try to find anything that we can offset that, where we can offset those feelings, where we can offset that pain. We begin to try to find things to put in the place to offset that, which just creates more of havoc. It creates more of question, right? It gets in the way of us actually healing ourselves. It gets in the way of us understanding what we're doing. It gets in the way so often. And that's what we have to really think about. And so I think it's positive and powerful when we begin to just analyze those thoughts, taking time. And no matter what you're going to hear, it's not going to be worse than the behavior. Remember, we sabotage. If you're catching any sort of personal sabotage, there is some negative thought processes in your head because you wouldn't be doing it otherwise. You wouldn't be doing it otherwise because at some degree, you're accepting that reality. You're accepting that reality. And then you have to ask yourself, why have I accepted other people to treat me poorly in my past? Why am I, and maybe you are now. Maybe there hasn't been a breakup and you're starting to realize that there are thoughts in your head and there are opinions of yourself that you have that's actually gotten you full circle into this relationship and created this reality. And it's time now to start analyzing that. Time is of the essence. And it doesn't matter how old you are. It's all about now. If we can do things now, we can understand why we chose now. We can get we can better understand ourselves and fully understand why we've done what we've done. And the most powerful thing is that I've realized that purpose is really based on knowing thyself. Know thyself. Learn about themselves. Grow. Accept. Validate. Self-love. Unconditional self-love is all about purpose. So stay tuned when I return. I'm going to give you some tips on how to really get to know yourself and how to be aware of these thoughts, and then how to be able to use some of this to cultivate a better relationship with yourself, a more understanding relationship. Stay tuned. Live Your True Life Perspectives with me, your host, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 2 shakes.
Get in here. You're listening to Perspectives with Ashley Burgess.
Welcome back live to Live Your True Life Perspectives, and I'm your host, Ashley Burgess. On today's show, I've been talking about getting to know yourself, connecting with that mental mindset, being able to hear the chatter in your own head and be able to understand what that chatter has done to your life, the direction that it's put in it, and the choices that you've made based on that chatter. And right before the break, I was discussing the black and white thinking and how to understand that extreme thought process. It's a big deal. It's a big deal to be able to uncover and depict and dissect the black and white thinking that has literally led us into many choices that were not beneficial. Self-sabotaging behavior, toxic relationships, the rewinding and the playing of the program, rewinding and playing, doing it all over again, consistently waiting and hoping for different results and getting the same thing because nothing's changed. So what do we do? What are some things that we can do? Well, the first thing is that we can begin to, literally quiet the mind by being able to turn off outside influences and be able to listen and just court reporter. Start taking some notes. Just take notes on your own thoughts. Start being aware of it. It's like listening to your friend pontificate and pontificate. Why aren't you valuable enough to listen to you? And one of the greatest things that comes out of this is we begin to understand the deepest fears we have. We begin to understand the black and white thinking we have that's not served us. A lot of times this black and white thinking has gotten us into these toxic relationships because of the fear of being alone, the fear of not having anybody, the fear of never getting married, the fear that nobody's going to ever find us attractive, and the list goes on. And so we accept whatever we get because we just don't want to be alone. And, it's interesting because, when we begin to listen, we begin to realize why we choose. We begin to understand. We begin to see the truth behind our choices. It's not because I find that when I begin working with folks, some of the things they say is, I can't believe I'm such an idiot, or I can't believe I fell for that, or I can't believe I got into this, or I'm just stupid for doing this. And that is not the case at all. It is not about stupidity. It's about a choice and a thought that was made within your psyche that went in there and became a core belief and was around for a very long time. Very old thoughts that have been literally running our life forever. And this is what I'm talking about in today's show. This is what I'm talking about. Whether you're listening on the radio live on USA Radio Networks or you're listening to the podcast, it's about really thinking about this stuff. It's about allowing these things in your head to understand, to see the reality, to understand what's really happening, to be able to see the value in listening to yourself and allowing yourself to communicate. And many of us don't realize that we haven't allowed ourselves to feel or to think for ourselves because maybe we were in an environment where it was normalized to not be able to feel, to not be able to communicate our emotions. And so we go through that process. And so now I'm giving you the ability. I'm telling you, you have the right to feel. You have the right to think for yourself. You have the right to feel your emotions. You have the right to express it. And you have the right to write down how you're really, truly feeling. It's very powerful stuff. Very powerful. And so I want you to think about this, where, really focus on that, really writing these things down, really connecting with it, really analyzing. And sometimes you can get a lot more information too from your thoughts, but also you'll realize that some of the things that triggered you with your ex or your current is triggering you based on your core beliefs that are based on this chatter that I'm talking about right now in today's show. So think about it. The more we analyze and understand ourselves, the better we understand why we made choices, the better we understand why we've chosen certain pathways. So we don't have to beat ourselves up about it. We actually have the knowledge to make this a powerful state, to make changes. And because we can always augment a thought. We can always augment a belief system. It doesn't have to stay. We can augment it, but we have to have the tools to do it. But we have to begin first by being aware and knowing what's being said and analyzing, being able to catch the red flags in our thoughts, be able to catch the black and white thinking, and be able to see where there's extreme thoughts that's not realistic and not to the best of our life. I hope this show has connected with you. Check out my website. Go to ashleyburgess.com, ashleyburges.com. If you'd like to work with me, you can click on the coaching tab, and you can sign up right there online. If you'd like to reach out to me and send me an email, you can go to ashleyburges.com, click on that contact page, and you can scroll down and you can actually send me an email from there. Make sure to put your correct email so I can respond back, and I will respond back ASAP. Also, don't forget to check out the YouTube channel. New video content every single week. Just search up Ashley, Berges. I look forward to seeing you next week, to being able to have the show and connecting with you on a thoughtful, emotional, psychological, mental way, and spiritual at that. Stay tuned. Live your true life perspectives with your host, me, Ashley Burgess, will be back in. I'll be back this time in 3 shakes.